To begin, let's flash back to December of 2014, when Super Smash Bros. For Wii U was at the top of the charts. The game had released less than a month prior to this, and had already sold over 500,000 copies in the US alone. Receiving 9s and 10s across the board, it was more than apparent that this game was a huge success for that poor, old, sad Wii U. And Sakurai couldn't have been prouder. That man wore himself to the bone to get that game done, and it took an incredible toll on him both mentally and physically. The problem? He was catering to fans. In general, catering to fans can be both a rewarding and a very destructive idea. While it can always give you something to strive for, you're never going to reach that point where everyone is happy, and you're never going to be satisfied with what you make. If you add in the Japanese work ethic to always give it your all, even if it kills you,
you've got a little something the Japanese like to call daijoubu.
In an interview with Game Informer magazine, Sakurai gave a glimpse into the trials and tribulations of Smash 4's development. In terms of scope and in terms of sheer number of characters, we went beyond our limits long ago. And yet, if we cut the number of fighters or modes in a future game, I'm sure there would be complaints. You could say that all the effort in the past to stretch out, keep pushing myself, and provide all these extra merits wound up tightening the noose around my neck in the future. That may seem like it contradicts my personal desire to keep giving gamers as much as I can, but I don't see an easy answer for it. It had gotten so stressful for Sakurai that he even considered leaving the Smash Bros. Series forever. Not that there wouldn't be another game in the series, but that he wouldn't be a part of it. He went on record saying, "With both Melee and Brawl, I made those games with the thought that there wouldn't be any more sequels. Thus, I really can't deny the chance for another. However, as for myself, I don't think there will be." This was all going through his head while Smash 4's DLC was being developed, and the tourney system prepared for the game's free update. News outlets went like crazy, as they do, posting up article after article, and that's kinda normal for him to say, since he's considered quitting the series after almost every title that's released. In fact, almost exactly 1 year after considering this leave, Smash Ultimate finished being planned, and the development on the game began with Sakurai as director. So what made him stay this time?
Let me explain.
With the exception of Melee, every Smash game was built from the ground up by its own personal team of developers, with Smash 64 and Melee being made by HAL Laboratory, Brawl by Sora Limited and Game Arts, Smash 4 by Bandai Namco, but Ultimate was different. For this game, Namco was once again contracted to be the main development team, and even though it's been stated by Nintendo Treehouse that Ultimate's engine was indeed built from the ground up, that doesn't mean they didn't use pieces from previous games. In fact, they 100% did. They reused assets like animations, models, music, sounds, etc., maybe changing them a bit here and there, but they definitely worked off the Wii U version of Smash 4 with the same team as before. This interesting scenario gave Sakurai an idea. The time was right. Because development wouldn't have to start from ground zero, they could include every fighter from all the previous games, and then this was it. If there was ever a time to include every character, it was now. The game from the beginning already had a team well versed in the Smash development process, with an already overwhelming amount of stages, items, characters, songs, and more. But when Sakurai revealed his plan to the team, he was just met with silence. I mean, after all, despite all that was going for the project already, it still wouldn't be an easy task by any means. Every fighter would have to be rebalanced. They'd have to jump through a ton of legal hoops just to get them all in. In fact, having every fighter in the game almost didn't even happen, just from the legality of it all. But despite all the fears and uncertainty, Nintendo had Sakurai's back, and development of the game officially began around February of 2016. But getting Ultimate to what it is today wasn't just difficult from a development standpoint, it was also personally difficult for Sakurai. At this point in the series, it's not really his choice whether a new Smash game will be made, it's Nintendo's. What characters go into the game isn't much of his choice either, it's the fans. Despite that, Sakurai takes his work very seriously, always wanting to do the best he can, and even beyond that, just to try to make fans happy. All the while thinking, man, I'd like to work on something else. That's not to say he couldn't be creative with Ultimate. Because they were working off a previous game, Sakurai was able to do things with Smash that he wanted to for years, like increasing the game's overall speed, just enough to where it wouldn't be too difficult and throw people off, but still faster to increase the intensity of the game. He was planning to include this idea on the Wii U and 3DS versions of Smash 4, but because it was already difficult enough to keep track of that tiny character on that tiny 3DS screen, speeding up the gameplay would only have made it even more frustrating, and would likely have turned off a lot of players from this version of the game. Much like with the 3DS version, Namco was once again concerned with screen size, this time on the Switch at the beginning of Ultimate's development. After all, the Switch was also in development at the time, so no one really knew what it would look like, or how big it would be, or if it would be good. So the team planned to have a separate portable and dock mode for the game, just in case. Luckily though, Sakurai was finally able to get a glimpse of the Switch in person, and found the LCD screen to be a lot clearer than he expected. So, with a sigh of relief, the team scrapped the idea for separate modes and decided to have everything remain the same, whether in docked or handheld mode. Something Sakurai definitely did want in this game though, was a single player mode, given fans have been clamoring, and I mean clamoring, for it since Brawl's story-driven Subspace Emissary. And technically the team delivered one, even though it wasn't exactly what people were expecting. The whole Spirit mode, which makes up the single player aspect of Ultimate, was mostly a result of the team's lack of available modelers, which meant that adding in new trophies and remastering older ones wasn't really an option. So instead of trophies, players were tasked to collect rare spirits. And what an array to collect! We've got everything from Sakapan from Joy Mecha Fight to Barba the Bat from Master of Illusion. Holy crap, I haven't thought about that game in freaking forever. That was kind of the point of having such a large variety of spirits. Even if it may seem like they just kind of threw it all together, the team didn't haphazardly pick these PNG files off of Miyamoto's hard drive. They actually had an entire subset of the team just for spirits, with the goal being to try to find as many memorable characters they could from as many different games as they could, which was more possible now since they wouldn't have to model each of the characters into trophy form. Now, along with these spirits came a new mode called World of Light, a single-player adventure slightly based emissary from Brawl. World of Light was basically supposed to fulfill that fan desire for a new story mode, except it didn't really focus on stories, so it's not really a whole lot of a comparison there. Sakurai mentioned this lack of story in an interview with Game Informer, where he explained that this was basically because of the large roster of the game. Having individual stories for each fighter would have been way too much work for the team to handle, so instead, he wanted World of Light to just be a fun, little mode, without requiring any new models for the team to create. After all, if they couldn't even model new trophies, then having uniquely modeled stages and stuff like that, it was out of the question. So instead of Subspace Emissary's side-scrolling stages and fully animated cutscenes, they went for a giant overworld with numerous small battles against computer players on normal stages. That obviously didn't mean World of Light wouldn't feature any story at all, far from it. There was some thought put into the backstory, like how all the characters ended up dead. The idea for the opening cutscene actually came from Subspace Emissary, specifically at the end of Chapter 9, when everyone is turned into a trophy by Taboo. Sakurai wanted to make it where that moment was the main focus of the game, where the player loses everyone and everything. And if we started the adventure from that point, you know, yay. Woohoo, boy. So we've made it to the halfway point of Ultimate's development. A round of applause. Alright, cool. Awesome. The whole team has been working tirelessly at this point to make the game as best as it could be. And now with 2018 beginning, it was time to start revealing that game to the public, with Sakurai awaiting those wonderful, happy fan responses. Actually though, it was pretty happy, much to his surprise. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was first teased in the March 8th, 2018 Nintendo Direct. Simply known as Super Smash Bros. At the time, it included the first reveal of the game's new Woomy characters, as well as the game's release date, set sometime within 2018. Then only 3 months later at E3 2018, the full reveal of Ultimate was shown, revealing all of the characters from all the previous Smash games getting a return, with a firm release date set for December 7th, 2018. And... wait, it wasn't delayed?
That's a first.
Alright, let's take a look at the footage that was shown at E3, as well as the tournament that accompanied that announcement. Though they are essentially the same build, so we'll just let them kind of run together. Now what treasure trove cove of differences are we gonna find here? Actually, not too many. Mostly because the game was already based on so many pre-developed assets, and it was released only 6 months after this footage was shown, so there wasn't a whole lot left to develop anyway. Still, there are some interesting differences here, and once again, the Beta Compare Club did an amazing job looking through all this footage. As always, I'm going to show you some of those highlights, and if you want to learn more, head over to club.beta64.tv. It's got all the differences there ready to be just plucked by your eyeballs. To begin, let's start with the stage selection, which despite playing a single player match, has a red selection hand for the first player, instead being a white glove from the final version. Now obviously there's a ton of missing stages, but that's just because this is a demo. For some actually interesting changes, there's a lack of buttons here that in the final build are used to activate the Omega and Battlefield versions of stages, as well as choosing the music tracks for the battle. Perhaps these options were created a little later on as a way to kind of streamline the stage selection experience, or maybe it's just that they wanted to limit the options for the players playing the demo. I mean, it's always better to remove as much ambiguity from a demo as possible. Not to mention, the final destination stage in the demo is completely different from the final version, instead being an Omega Battlefield, likely because the new design for the stage wasn't finalized by the time the demo was shown. Now with the stage selected, let's move on to the character selection screen, which has a ton of really small changes, like a lot of icons changed in size, with most of them being more zoomed in the demo compared to the final. Out of all of this though, Mario's render has got to be what changed the most, going from this, which is honestly a pretty gross render, to a nice, sleek, clean render that really lets you know that Mario's ready to crunch those nips. In a strange turn of events for Nintendo, after E3 they decided to make 7 bazillion more new, different demos for people to play. And thankfully for the Beta Compare Club, most of these were just dumbed down versions of the final build. And 6 months later at the promised time, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate released with fairly little issues. Despite all the doubts from the team, Sakurai's dream, or rather, our dream, became a reality, with every single character from previous games making a comeback, as well as some new ones like King K. Rool, Isabelle, and the long-awaited Ridley, whose fan push for Smash can be traced back till well over 15 years ago, during Melee's heyday. This fan demand reached all the way to Sakurai, who was asked after the release of Brawl if it would be possible to add Ridley into a future game, which he replied a big fat no. He went on record saying that it would be nearly impossible to include this beast due to creative difficulties, and that despite him being so highly requested, even since Melee, Sakurai just couldn't see Ridley making it without reducing his size, mobility, and wingspan. Sakurai wanted to remain true to the character, so he hoped that maybe fans would be okay with Ridley just being a stage boss in Brawl. But no. So he hoped maybe fans would be okay with Ridley just being a stage hazard in Smash for Wii U. But no. Alright. He's an ultimate, Sakurai said begrudgingly. And with that, hopes and dreams were finally fulfilled. And on December 7th, 2018, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate released for the Nintendo Switch, and finally, everyone was happy. Alright, fine. I understand that competitively, this game does have some issues, and of course, Spirit Mode isn't everyone's cup of delicious Earl Grey tea. But honestly for me, this is the most fun I've had with the Smash Bros. Game since I got Melee on the GameCube. So, I'm okay with it. And now that it's been almost 2 months after release, data miners have already found some amazing unused stuff in Ultimate and put it on the cutting room floor. So as always, I'm going to give you some of the most interesting pieces of info on the site, but be sure to check out the page in its entirety by clicking the link in the description after the video. Now, before we start, it should be pretty obvious that because Ultimate used so many assets from Smash 4 for Wii U, there was bound to be a ton of leftover content from the previous game. Heck, even Ultimate's internal name is Cross 2, with Smash 4's name just being Cross, so of course, leftovers abound here. And of those leftovers, let's start with Donkey Konga Bonga Drummos that were originally used for DK's Final Smash in the Wii U version, but became a leftover in Ultimate when they changed his Final Smash to Punch-a-Punch. In much the same fashion, Link's taunt changed, leaving Navi homeless and left over in the files forever. And not to mention, there's quite a bit of leftovers from modes that didn't make it into Ultimate, like Home Run Contest, which is still mentioned several times within the game's code. With all that being said, there are still some unused assets in Ultimate that aren't just leftovers from the Wii U version. Like with Ditto, the Pokemon that clones the player acting as a CPU ally for a short period of time. It's actually pretty simple how the game accomplishes this, by the way. All it does is spawn a CPU version of the player character, and instead of looking like normal, it uses a material to make it look purple and gross. I say all this because for some reason, there's material data for this Ditto CPU doing things like victory poses, final smashes, and making an entrance into the stage, despite the fact that it can do none of these things. But these Ditto materials aren't nearly as cool as freaking Giga Bowser, am I right? Yes, I already know he's a boss in the game, but here's the thing. Unlike the other bosses, which are internally considered bosses, Giga Bowser is internally a fighter. Now this could totally be a leftover from Smash 4, where Giga Bowser was playable as Bowser's Final Smash, but here's the thing, he's not just playable. He's got alternate costumes, a Final Smash, a result screen pose, and even a Kirby copy ability. And while he's in the game, despite missing a character portrait, he's fully playable with a full moveset, and can even be knocked back if he's at high enough percentage. After winning the match, which will inevitably happen because you're a frickin' tank, the game will crash, because it can't find the audio file of the announcer saying,
Giga Bowser wins,
and whatnot and so forth and what have you. Oh, and speaking of audio files, there's a few unused ones in Ultimate as well, but only one of them isn't technically a leftover. It's actually the sound that plays when Jigglypuff uses his pound move. But what's interesting here isn't the sound, but the file name. It's called item Harisen M, with Harisen being the Japanese name for the fan item, which hasn't seen an appearance in the Smash series since Brawl. So could this latest Smash game have been the return of the most beloved, popular, super cool item in the world?
Alright, well thanks for watching.